Hi, I'm Uzaifa from BohriAli. Today I'm going to walk you through the steps we take to finish a resin river table. In our previous two videos, we've spoken a lot about how to make a resin river table and all the other processes that go in making these tables, like mold making, casting, pouring resin, things like estimation. Today we'll go through one of the most important steps of making a resin river table, that is the sanding and finishing part. It's quite easy actually to cast a table. You'll make the mold, you will pour resin, you will choose the right colors, you'll do everything. But the most important step according to us is the finishing and the sanding of the table. If you don't get the finish right, if you don't sand the table to the right grit, you don't sand the table to the right smoothness, the table is never going to look as good as you want it to. What you will see, even if you sit at a cafe and you look down on the table you're sitting on, if it is a wooden table, you'll see a lot of straight circular marks. Those are usually what a grinder leaves. You see over here closely, these marks are left by a grinder, and once you polish over that, it doesn't really look good. The continuity of the grains lengthwise gets broken off by these marks, and it looks very untidy and doesn't look nice. A lot of people don't even know what a sander is. They think a grinder is a sander, or they use a belt sander directly. But what you actually need to use for finishing a table, the final step, it has to be a random orbital sander. A belt sander is usually the step before this sander. It is used to remove material. It's used for coarse sanding, remove material faster. So a random orbital rotates with a slight offset, and that's what does this fine sanding that gives you an amazing finish. This right here, what we use is a Mirka Deros sander. This is a 6-inch sander. It's connected by a vacuum. It's dust-free sanding, and dust-free sanding is very, very important. Then there is this Bosch Jex 125. This is a 5-inch sander. You get the same thing in a 6-inch sander as well. So the Bosch sander is very, very good for DIYers. And if you're just looking to start out from home, make say 1 or 2 tables, you can definitely go in for this sander. It will not cost you more than 5,000 to 6,000 rupees, and it's a very, very good sander. Moving on to the sandpapers now. You get a lot of sandpapers out there in the market, anywhere from 15 rupees to 20 rupees to all the way up to 150 rupees, 125 rupees a paper, or even as expensive as 350 to 400 rupees a paper. What we like using are the Mirka sandpapers. They work really, really well. This is one of their products. That is the Nova Star paper. And what Nova Star does is that it does coarse sanding very well. It removes material really fast, and as well as the finish is very good. For resin, we have noticed that because sometimes you need to remove a lot of material, it's very nice. And what that means is that the sanding happens faster, your job gets completed quicker. There is basically no compromise in the quality of the final finish of the sanding. And the price might be 4 times more or 5 times more. These are ceramic coated film papers. You can press it and look at that. Nothing happens to the paper. The papers that we used to use earlier used to be much cheaper, but these papers last 5 times more. Now moving on to the Mirka, it's called the Abron Net paper. So as you can see, it's like a mesh. So what this does is very, very good for dust extraction. Works very well. And this is a very good finishing paper. So maybe like the higher grades, 240, 320, we tend to use these papers quite a bit. So what's really important about sanding is choosing the right sandpaper. First you choose the right quality, then you choose the right grit. The sandpapers usually start from 80 grit. 80 grit is really coarse. Then you move on to 120 grit. Then you move on to 240 grit. And then you move on to 320 grit. And we sand only up to 320 grit or to 180 grit depending on the polish that we use. So Osmo allows you to sand up to 320 grit. So we sand up to 320 grit. What that gives you is that it gives you more clarity and a little bit of more sheen. If we are going to polish a table with Ruger monocoat, we sand the table to 180 grit. Now choosing the right grade. So say you've used the belt sander before you're going to move on to the random orbital sander. You will need to start with 80 grit because there will be scratches of the belt sander on the table, and those scratches are now going to come off with 120 grit, or even if they do, they'll take much longer than the 80 grit. You sand with 80 grit and it'll be much easier to remove those belt sander scratches than if you start off with say 120 grit. And then moving onwards from 80 grit. So a lot of people keep asking that why do that 120 grit or 180 grit in the middle of 80 and 240. Simple thing, same thing again, that the scratches that 80 grit paper is going to make, those scratches are now going to come off easily with 240 grit. Those scratches will only come out with 120 grit and 180 grit. So if you move from 80 grit to 120 grit, what 120 grit is going to do is that it's going to remove the scratch marks of 80 much more easily, and then you can move from 120 to 180, then 240, and then 320. If you want a much better finish, you can even do 150 grit in the middle of 120 and 180 grit. It will give you a much smoother and better finish. We'll move on to how to use the sander properly. So I'm putting the 80 grit paper for now. So 2-3 things about the sander. So what a lot of people tend to do is that they press, if they see a lot of scratches in that area, they press the sander and they use the sander thinking that it's going to remove those scratches. But all that does is that it's going to put the sandpaper deeper in your wood and it's going to cause and form more scratches. Those are deeper, right? So to get rid of them, then you will have to sand a lot in that area to reach that scratch. And that just increases your time instead of decreasing your time. And then another thing you tend to do is that, say for example, grinder marks. Those are quite difficult sometimes to get if it's deep. So what you tend to do is that you tend to go cross on it, and even I've been there, you feel like doing that. But what that cross sanding is going to do is that firstly it makes like a depression in the wood. So when you put your finger from one edge to another, you'll have small depressions, and that's not what you want in your finish. You want that smooth finish, right? We're taking the pains to sand the table for so long. We sometimes spend 3-4 hours sanding these tables, so you want to give the best finish. So I'd advise you all to not do cross sanding. And then the third thing is that every sander usually comes with a variable speed control. So generally about 4,000 to 5,000 RPM is a good speed to sand at. Anything above that, you're going to be able to remove material faster, but you're going to have a lot of scratches on it, which will take time to remove with the higher grit papers. Now, why we use the Mirka sander? It's extremely light and it has very less vibrations. So because of that, firstly, you don't feel tired very fast. And secondly, the quality of the sanding is very good. It's top notch. So wherever you see a grinder mark or something like that, you can just lightly sand over that area for 3 or 4 minutes more, and those marks will come off eventually. So as you can see over here, because the sander is connected to a dust extraction vacuum, you can see that it sucked in all of the dust on the table. So there was some dust from first, right? All of that has been taken away, and that's how amazing these sanders are and this vacuum is, and that's why we use it, and we don't use these Bosch sanders anymore. Now, normal sanding, you have to keep 2-3 things in mind. So what happens after sanding is that if you do not sand the entire table evenly, what you will get is slight deviations and imperfections in the table. If you, for example, sand more over here and you sand less over here, when you run your finger from here to here, you'll feel like a slight deviation, and that's not what you're looking for. So a simple way to do sanding is that once you start, then you, so if this is the first line, then where your sand ended, you basically overlap half of that. You'll understand more of that by seeing it visually in the video. Sanding is all about doing it aram se. You don't need to be in a hurry. Run the sander slowly so that you get a much more even sand. So you move very slowly. You let the sander do its job. See, these sanders are designed such that The weight of the sander itself is enough for it to sand. You don't need to press, you don't need to do anything. All you need to do is press the button. See, I can even sand with, you can even sand with one finger. So you let the sander do its job. You do it at a slow speed and you'll get a very good finish. So one thing you can remember is that while sanding, if you're using a vacuum pipe, you can hold the vacuum pipe in one hand, and what that will make sure is that the sander won't go like this. So what happens is while sanding, you just make sure that the weight of the pipe doesn't take the sander like this down, and make sure that you're sanding. And what this will ensure is that when you run your finger, when you take your hand from this to this, you will never have that dip. It'll always be the same level. Then one thing to always remember is that when you switch between grits, or after every 10-15 minutes of sanding, you can just wipe it all off with a clean cloth. What this does is that whatever little dust is left on your surface, it wipes that off and makes sure that when you sand again, that same dust doesn't spin on the surface and scratch it more. So you should always wipe it and then move on to the next grit. So this is one tricky bit about sanding that people keep asking, that how do you know when you're done sanding one particular grit? Say first I have a lot of grinder marks or a belt sander marks. So first obviously you sand till those marks, all of those marks come off. Then after that, what do? Do you still keep sanding, or what are you looking out for? So basically what you're looking out for is that all over your surface, the entire surface, you'll see small scratches that are of the 80 grit sandpaper. And these scratches, there should be small scratches over the entire surface, over the entire table. Once there is the uniformity of scratches, you know that you can move to the next grit. And then once you take 120 grit and you sand over 80, all those 80 scratches are going to come off, and you'll have tinier scratches, but they'll be the 120 grit sand, and then you move on. And by the time you reach, say, about 320 grit, most of these scratches will all be gone, or they'll be very, very minor. So sanding is extremely important to do, because if you just polish it after, say, grinder, like even for a grinder paper, you get 120 grit grinder papers, you use that, your table is going to become really smooth. But as I said earlier, there are going to be scratches on the wood, and so the grains will not be as beautiful because of those scratches. And obviously the higher the grit you go, once you reach 320, it'll be a lot of fun, because you will see how smooth the tables actually become. Another question we keep getting is that how do I get that original gloss back of the resin? So everyone keeps complaining that when we cast resin or when we coat resin, it looks so beautiful, but once we sand it or once we cut it, that gloss goes away. How do we get it back? It's pretty simple, guys, but it's the same funda. You have to start at 80 grit, and just like we're sanding to 320 grit, instead, to get the original gloss back, you have to sand all the way up to 4000 grit. So that is, after 320, you still have to sand 400, 500, 800, 1000, then you wet sand 2000 grit, 3000 grit, 4000 grit. And after that, you use a rubbing compound to do some rubbing, and then a polishing compound to do polishing, and you'll get your original gloss back. But the problem with that glossy finish, that high gloss finish that you get, is that then that doesn't have such a durable finish, and it takes on a lot of scratches. Whereas once you sand to 320, it's matte also, so you see less scratches. And second thing is that the polish that we put on top, the polish that we apply on top, that has some durability from scratches. So this mostly covers everything you need to know about sanding the top part of the table. But now comes the side. So the sides are extremely important, but because when you see a table from the side, the sides look really beautiful, right? But if you have used a cutting machine, like a circular saw, to cut it, or you've used a grinder to level it out, it's very important to sand it after that. Otherwise, you will see all those grinder marks on the sides, even after polish, and that's not going to look good, and you will never be happy with that finish. But when you sand, what happens is that if you do not sand it properly, the straightness of the edge tends to go away, right? You must have noticed many times that when you touch the side, it has a slight depression, or it slightly has like a curved surface now. So how do you stop that? What you simply do is that when you sand, you apply a little bit of pressure on the sander and then you sand, so that it stays absolutely straight. If you do not apply pressure, what happens is that the sander goes go like this. And what this will do is that it will start curving the edge, and then you get that curved edge, and you're not looking for that. You want that straight edge. So just make sure you apply a little bit of pressure and sand, and you'll be fine. I can assure you that if you follow these simple steps, you will get an amazing table. The finish on it will be really, really good. You'll be really happy. So please do comment below and let us know about your experience on how you sanded your resin river table. Thanks for watching this video. See you next time.